You are 12 years old, standing in a cold stone corridor, and the men in the next room are deciding who will own your body. You can hear their voices through the heavy oak door, confident, transactional, discussing your future the way merchants discuss the price of wool. Your hands are trembling, not from the February chill that seeps through the castle walls, but from the terrible understanding that is beginning to dawn on you. You are not a child anymore. You are property, and in 3 days you will be given to a boy you have never met, your childhood ending not with celebration, but with a contract signed by men who will never ask your name. This is Margaret Beaufort's 12th year, and she is about to learn that noble blood is both blessing and curse, that to be born wealthy and female in 1455 is to be the most valuable and most vulnerable creature in England. Before we go further into Margaret's world, I'm genuinely curious, where are you watching this from? It never stops amazing me that a girl's story from medieval England can reach across centuries and continents to wherever you are right now. That connection across time is exactly why these stories matter. Margaret Beaufort entered the world in 1443 as both miracle and burden. She was the sole heir of John Beaufort, Duke of Somerset, a man whose lineage traced back to John of Gaunt and his mistress-turned-wife, Catherine Swynford. This made Margaret's blood royal, but tainted legitimate by decree, but forever shadowed by the word bastard that whispered through her family tree. When her father died before she reached her first birthday, Margaret inherited estates across Somerset, Devon, and Dorset, thousands of acres that generated wealth most nobles could only dream of. But this inheritance came with invisible chains. In 15th century England, a wealthy orphan girl didn't inherit freedom. She inherited a target on her back. The system was brutally efficient. Wealthy orphans became wards of the crown, and the king sold these wardships to the highest bidder. Whoever purchased Margaret's wardship controlled not just her lands, but her marriage and therefore her future. She was 6 months old when she became a commodity. She was 12 when the transaction was finally completed. The man who purchased Margaret's future was William de la Pole, Duke of Suffolk, one of the most powerful men in England and a master of political calculation. He paid handsomely for the right to arrange Margaret's marriage, and he knew exactly how to maximize his investment. He would marry her to his own son, John, creating a union that would funnel Margaret's enormous wealth directly into the de la Pole family coffers for generations. It was brilliant strategy. It was also legal rape, sanctioned by church and state. The wedding takes place in a chapel at Bletsoe Castle on a morning so cold that Margaret can see her breath as she speaks her vows. She wears blue silk, the color of royalty, though she feels anything but royal. The dress has been tailored to fit her child's body, but it hangs strangely, making her look like she's playing dress-up in someone else's costume. Her groom, John de la Pole, is perhaps 14, gangly and uncomfortable in his own formal clothes. Neither child wants to be here. Neither child has any choice. The Latin words taste unfamiliar in Margaret's mouth. Ego Margareta te Johannem in maritum recipio. I, Margaret, take you, John, as my husband. The phrase is a lie. She is not taking him, she is being taken. But medieval marriage law requires her consent, so she gives the words that the law demands, speaking them clearly because she has already learned that resistance is futile. The adults have decided. The contract is signed. Her body, her lands, her future, all of it now belongs to a boy who cannot meet her eyes. That night, they consummate the marriage. Or rather, the adults insist they must, because medieval law requires consummation to make a marriage legally binding. The Church acknowledges that 12-year-olds cannot truly consent, but it permits the marriage anyway, creating a grotesque legal contradiction. Margaret is simultaneously too young to consent and old enough to be bound. The adults who orchestrate this call it duty. History would call it what it actually is. The months that follow teach Margaret lessons no child should learn. She lives in the de la Pole household. treated with the courtesy due to her rank but controlled with the thoroughness applied to valuable property. She cannot travel without permission, cannot write letters without supervision, cannot make any decision about her own estates or income. Even her daily schedule when she eats, what she wears, where she goes, is determined by others. Her inheritance generates thousands of pounds annually, but she cannot spend a single penny without approval. She owns everything and controls nothing. Margaret learns to watch. She sits quietly at meals in the great hall, observing the adults discuss politics, military campaigns, shifting alliances. She notes who defers to whom, who fears whom, who is genuinely powerful and who merely pretends. She is learning the architecture of power, mapping its structures with the careful attention of someone who knows survival depends on understanding the game. And then, barely a year into the marriage, John de la Pole dies. Fever takes him in the autumn of 1444, and Margaret receives the news while embroidering in the solar, her needle creating tiny golden stitches in silk thread. The Duke of Suffolk delivers the information without warmth. "Your husband is dead. You will remain in this household until other arrangements can be made." Margaret's needle doesn't stop. She has learned not to show emotion in front of powerful men, learned that any reaction can be used against you. The displays of feeling are interpreted as weakness. "I understand," she says quietly, and continues her work. Inside, something is stirring that she doesn't yet have a name for. Relief? Guilt about feeling relief? A terrible premature understanding that this death might be the best thing that has happened to her? Because here's what medieval law provides. Margaret's marriage was never fully consummated in the legal sense. Both children were too young for the union to be considered complete. This technicality means her inheritance remains hers, not transferred to her dead husband's family. At 13, Margaret is a widow, still one of the wealthiest heiresses in England, and once again available for marriage. The cycle is about to begin again. Her second marriage is arranged within months. This time, King Henry VI himself grants Margaret's wardship to Edmund Tudor, Earl of Richmond, the king's half-brother. Edmund is approximately 24 years old, 12 years Margaret's senior, and he understands exactly what he's gaining. The negotiations take place at Westminster Palace, in a great hall where Margaret stands beside a carved pillar and listens to men discuss her estates as though she were invisible. Edmund Tudor's voice carries clearly across the vaulted space. "The girl's lands will provide substantial income for our household. With proper management, the estates should support our position at court and fund our military obligations." The wedding ceremony in early 1456 is more elaborate than Margaret's first marriage, befitting Edmund's higher rank. Margaret is now 13, considered fully adult by medieval standards. This time, there is no legal ambiguity about consummation. Edmund is an experienced man claiming what he believes is rightfully his. The encounter is brief, painful, and entirely about establishing dominance. Margaret, who thought she understood what marriage meant, learns there are deeper levels of powerlessness she hasn't yet experienced. Life with Edmund Tudor reveals the full reality of her position. He immediately reorganizes her estates, replacing her stewards with his own men, diverting her income to fund his military campaigns and political activities. Margaret watches her inheritance, the lands her father left her, being used to pursue ambitions she never chose. She is 14 years old, and learning that wealth without control is just another form of poverty. The political landscape of England in 1456 is increasingly dangerous. The Wars of the Roses. The brutal civil war between the Lancastrian and Yorkist factions is beginning to tear the country apart. Edmund Tudor, as a staunch Lancastrian supporter, is a target for Yorkist forces. In August 1456, he's captured and imprisoned at Carmarthen Castle in Wales. 3 months later, he's dead from fever, leaving Margaret a widow for the second time. She is 14 years old and 7 months pregnant. The news reaches her at Pembroke Castle, where she has taken refuge under the protection of Edmund's brother, Jasper Tudor. The messenger delivers the information tersely. Edmund died in prison. The Yorkists are ascendant. Margaret's position is precarious. She is a Lancastrian widow with no male protector, carrying a child who will inherit his father's enemies along with his title. Every day of her pregnancy is shadowed by the knowledge that she and her baby are political targets. The labor begins on January 28, 1457, in a cold chamber at Pembroke Castle. Margaret is 13 years old, her body still that of a child, now attempting to birth a child of its own. The midwives who attend her have experience, but medieval obstetrics is more prayer than science. The mortality rate for mothers and babies is horrifyingly high, and Margaret's age makes everything more dangerous. The labor lasts for hours. Pain that Margaret has no framework to process, no language to describe. Her small frame struggles with the impossible physics of childbirth. The midwives murmur prayers and apply herbal remedies that do nothing to ease the agony. There are moments when it seems certain that both mother and child will die in this cold Welsh castle, victims of political ambition and medieval medicine. But Margaret survives, and so does the baby a son, healthy and strong despite everything. She names him Henry, after the king, a political choice that signals continued Lancastrian loyalty even as the faction's power crumbles. The boy who emerges from this ordeal will grow up to become Henry VII, the first Tudor King of England. But in January 1457, he is simply a newborn whose survival depends on his traumatized 13-year-old mother's ability to navigate a world designed to destroy them both. The physical trauma of the birth leaves permanent damage. Margaret will never have another child. Whether this is due to medical complications, deliberate choice, or the psychological aftermath of giving birth at 13 remains unclear. What is certain is that the experience marks her profoundly. She has been married twice, widowed twice, and given birth once, all before her 14th birthday. Her childhood is over, incinerated in the crucible of medieval politics and the brutal realities of noble marriage. The months following Henry's birth are characterized by desperate vulnerability. Margaret is a twice-widowed teenage mother with a Lancastrian infant son, surrounded by Yorkist enemies who would benefit from both their deaths. She needs protection, but her options are limited. Her solution is pragmatic. She arranges her own third marriage, this time to Sir Henry Stafford, younger son of the Duke of Buckingham. This marriage, formalized in 1458 when Margaret is 15, is different from her previous unions. For the first time, Margaret herself plays an active role in the negotiations. She is no longer a child being traded by guardians. She is a young woman with property and a son to protect, making calculated choices about her own survival. Henry Stafford is approximately 30, experienced enough to provide genuine protection, and crucially willing to respect Margaret's role as Henry Tudor's mother. Their marriage becomes something closer to a partnership than ownership. The 13 years of Margaret's marriage to Stafford, from 1458 to 1471, represent the most stable period of her early life. Under his protection, she begins to develop her political skills and build the networks that will eventually help her son claim the throne. She becomes deeply involved in Lancastrian politics, using her wealth to support the cause and her intelligence to build alliances. She is learning to transform her painful experiences into political capital. When Henry Stafford dies in 1471, Margaret is 28 years old, no longer a victim, but a player. Her fourth and final marriage to Thomas Stanley, Earl of Derby, is entirely strategic. Stanley is a political survivor who has maintained his position through multiple regime changes. Their union, formalized in 1472, gives Margaret the protection and flexibility she needs to pursue her ultimate goal, securing the throne for her son. The next 13 years test every skill Margaret has developed. She navigates the dangerous world of Yorkist rule under Edward IV and later Richard III, always working toward her son's interests while avoiding the fate of nobles who miscalculate. When Richard III seizes the throne in 1483, Margaret makes her final, most dangerous gambit. She supports Henry Tudor's invasion of England. August 22, 1485. The Battle of Bosworth Field. Henry Tudor's forces face Richard III's army in Leicestershire. Margaret, now 42 years old, waits for news that will determine whether her decades of sacrifice have meaning or whether everything ends in her son's death and her own destruction. When the messenger arrives with news of Henry's victory, Richard dead, the crown recovered from a thorn bush and placed on Henry's head, Margaret finally achieves what she has fought for since she was 13 years old and holding a newborn in a Welsh castle. Her son is King Henry VII, and Margaret Beaufort, the girl who was married at 12 and gave birth at 13, becomes My Lady the King's mother, one of the most powerful women in England. The irony is not lost on Margaret herself. She has spent her entire adult life fighting for her son's future, sacrificing personal happiness and enduring repeated trauma to secure his position. Her victory is complete, but it is also hollow. She has gained power, but lost the possibility of the life she might have chosen if choice had ever been available to her. Her later years are marked by deep religious devotion, founding schools, supporting religious institutions, translating spiritual texts. Perhaps this is genuine faith. Perhaps it is penance for the compromises she made. Perhaps it is both. Margaret Beaufort dies in 1509. Shortly after her son, having lived to see her grandson, Henry VIII, begin his reign. She is buried in Westminster Abbey beneath a bronze effigy that shows her hands folded in prayer, her face serene. But the monument cannot capture the fire that burned inside her, the determination that transformed trauma into power, that turned a powerless child into the architect of a dynasty. The girl, who stood in a cold corridor at 12, listening to men decide her fate, became the woman who decided the fate of England itself. She learned the rules of a game designed to destroy her, and she played it so masterfully that she changed the game forever. Her story is not a fairy tale of triumph, it is something more complex and more true. It is the story of survival purchased at terrible cost, of power gained through suffering, of a life that was both victory and tragedy, inextricably intertwined. In Westminster Abbey, the stone effigy lies silent, but Margaret's voice echoes, still whispering across centuries to every person who has ever been told they are powerless, that their body belongs to others, that their future is not their own. She whispers, "Learn the game, master it, and when they think they own you, show them who you've become." The 12-year-old girl became England's most powerful woman. But the question that lingers, the one the monument cannot answer, is this: was the crown worth the childhood she never had?